Donald Trump was not alone in his mistreatment by legacy media. In the 2019 Democratic primary debates, presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard had her face digitally altered on live television. NBC motion-tracked a fake blemish onto Gabbard's face, which would frequently vanish and reappear in real time.
Far more costly than anything that we ever saw in Iraq. It would take many more lives. It would exacerbate the refugee crisis.
Did anybody after the debates mention it to you that this strange thing seemed to happen?
No, I had no idea. You guys are clearly on it. When I saw it, I was like, that wasn't there. That wasn't there at all yesterday. And then to see it disappear was very strange.
So you know how Trump is going to overthrow Venezuela so we could steal their oil? That's why they've been sanctioning Venezuela and giving $40 billion to Argentina. Argentina is supposed to be a great capitalist society, yet they need a bailout from the United States. Whereas Venezuela, Cuba, we've been sanctioning the hell out of them, and somehow their countries keep moving right along. So now Trump's going to have to overthrow Venezuela because Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia. Just FYI. So now they've been bombing these fishing boats or boats, and they claim they're running drugs. Well, if they're really running drugs, what you're supposed to do is the Coast Guard is supposed to grab them and you put them on trial. That's what you do with drug runners. But what they've been doing is just bombing them. In fact, now they claim there was a submarine, and so they bombed a submarine, but 2 people survived. And it's funny, the 2 people that survived, they didn't arrest them and put them on trial. They just released them and sent them back to their home country. Isn't that weird? Here it is right here from the New York Times. The Trump administration has decided to repatriate. That means send the people back to their country. 2 survivors of a deadly U.S. strike on a suspected drug runners in the Caribbean Sea rather than prosecute or hold them in military detention. Why wouldn't you want to just send them to Guantanamo? Why wouldn't you want to hold them in military detention? Why would you let these drug runners go back to their country so they could do more drug running? Oh, I know, because it's not about drug running. It's about overthrowing and doing another regime change in a country that has natural resources we want to steal. And it's not just oil. There's lots of stuff that Venezuela has. And I'm sure if you look, they probably have cobalt. They probably have all kinds of stuff for batteries. They probably have lots of stuff. The Trump administration is repatriating 2 survivors. The men who survived were being returned to their home countries, Colombia and Ecuador, for detention and prosecution. That's what the president said. Mr. Trump posted a 29-second video showing the semi-submersible vessel that was traveling partially below the water being blown up. He said 2 other suspected drug smugglers, whom he called terrorists, had been killed in the attack. Well, if you wanted to kill them, why would you just release them back to their own country? Why wouldn't you bring them to the United States for prosecution? I know why. It was not immediately possible to confirm that either of them had agreed to so they haven't agreed to prosecute the 2 men, but Trump and his United States already sent them back to their countries. So here it is. There it is. That's the submarine they say was carrying drugs, and then they bombed it. That's what they did. And then 2 people lived. So Trump unclassified that video. So Colombia had no immediate comment. An official in Ecuador said the government was confirming that one of its nationals was among the survivors. If that were the case, the official said he could be brought to Ecuador, but Trump had previously described people aboard suspected drug smuggling boats, which the United States has targeted in several deadly airstrikes. He called them unlawful combatants. He has claimed the authority, widely disputed by legal experts, to summarily kill such suspects in military strikes as if they were enemy soldiers in a war. Even if they're what he says, they're just drug runners, you don't get to bomb them. You have to arrest them and prove it. We're not at war with Venezuela. It was a sharp, well, we actually are. It's a war we're initiating. It's a war of aggression. It's more imperialism. It was a sharp break from the traditional handling of maritime smuggling, in which the Coast Guard would intercept boats, arrest the people if suspicions proved accurate. That's how you're supposed to handle this. But this isn't about drug running because the drugs aren't coming from Venezuela. This is about Donald Trump getting rid of Maduro and installing a puppet like Juan Guaido. That's what this is about. The decision to transfer the two survivors, however, was in line with the Coast Guard's practice of repatriating or handing off to friendly countries people who were intercepted outside the United States as suspected traffickers. It also avoided the dilemma of what to do with the first people captured in what Mr. Trump has declared a formal armed conflict against drug cartels. Holding them as indefinite wartime detainees at the military prison in Guantanamo Bay could have opened the door to a court reviewing whether this really is a war as part of a habeas corpus lawsuit. So the last thing Trump wants to do is have a court look into all these murders he's committing of these people in boats in Venezuela and what that's actually about. They don't want that. They don't want to have a hearing in front of a judge. They don't want them to be able to present evidence. They don't want any of that. That's why they're bombing them. And then if anybody survives, they send them back to their own country. Prosecuting the men in the U.S. civilian court would have raised other problems. For one, it was not known if any courtroom admissible evidence was available to demonstrate that the survivors of the attack, so they didn't have any evidence. So there's no evidence that these people they're bombing are actually running drug. So if they brought that to court, they would be embarrassed. Also, avoiding legal and logistical headaches by sending the men home seemed to contradict the administration's stance that suspected drug smugglers pose such a severe danger that Mr. Trump can have them military summarily kill them. So if they're such a danger, wouldn't you want to kill them? The Trump administration has justified its attacks on drug smuggling suspects in the Caribbean as a formal armed conflict and as national defense, but without offering an explanation for how it can legitimately treat the crime of drug smuggling as if it were an armed attack or combat. The administration has stressed that about 100,000 Americans die from drug overdoses each year, but the surge in overdoses has been driven by fentanyl, which comes from Mexico, not South America. And that's according to the Drug Enforcement, that's according to the DEA and the Justice Department and the Congressional Research Service. So all these bodies inside the United States government working under Trump are completely contradicting what Trump is saying. That the drugs aren't coming from Venezuela. The drugs that are killing people in the United States are coming from Mexico. And who says that? His own DEA says that. The Justice Department says that. And the Congressional Research Service says that. Mr. Trump asserted in his post that intelligence had confirmed that the semi-submersible craft had been loaded up with, well, if you've confirmed it, why wouldn't you show us the evidence? It had been loaded up with fentanyl and other illegal narcotics, even though we know fentanyl is coming from Mexico, and that at least 25,000 Americans would die if I allowed this submarine to come ashore. He did not offer evidence for his assertion about what it was carrying or about the possible consequences if the vessel reached the United States. The two men were the only survivors of the military strike late Thursday on a so-called semi-submersible vessel that was traveling partially below water. 3 of the U.S. officials with knowledge of the operation said special operations aircraft had fired on the vessel in the southern Caribbean after U.S. intelligence analysts assessed it was carrying some kind of drugs. Were those the same U.S. intelligence analysts who said Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction? Yeah. Minutes after the strike, analysts watched. So they were floating. The Pentagon. Okay, we got you. On Saturday, officials said the Pentagon transferred legal custody of the 2 detainees to the State Department. Blah blah. The apparent blah blah blah. So Alex Tabarek says bizarre and troubling that the United States kills at sea without a trial, but won't try to prosecute the survivors in open court. That's because that's not what this is about. That's not what this is about. So the people on these boats are terrorists who can be killed without any due process. But if they don't die in the initial strike, they just get released to go home without warning? Seriously? Oh. Yeah. Seriously. So you can summarily kill them, but if they don't get killed, you just let them go. Isn't that weird? That seems weird to me. Here's the weirdest part about this. MSNBC agree. Of course, the establishment agrees with what Trump is doing. That's why they had a No Kings rally And nobody made a demand of anything like, hey, stop invading other countries, stop the war machine. Nothing. Because the Democrat billionaires and the Republican billionaires all agree they want to overthrow Venezuela. They're always for it. The New York Times is always for war and overthrowing governments like we did in Libya, in Iraq, in Syria, in Iran, Afghanistan, and now Venezuela. And here it is. This is Richard Haas. He was the president of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is where all the horrible, evil fuckery happens at the Council on Foreign Relations. They're the ones behind every regime change war we've done, everything. They're behind it.